Hi, welcome to the All Things LGBTQ interview show, where we interview LGBTQ guests who are making important contributions to our communities.
All Things LGBTQ is taped at Orca Media in Montpelier, Vermont, which we recognize as being unceded Indigenous land.
Thanks for joining us and enjoy the show.
So, on multiple news format programs for all things LGBTQ, we've been talking about our concerns with what this hostile regime is doing to specifically target our communities and the incredible damage that that might create. Well, many of you may have already gotten a notice from the Pride Center about a direct hit here in Vermont. So rather than trying to report on it, I want to talk with one of the people who is going to be directly impacted by that cut. So please welcome back one of our favorite guests, Kell Arbor from the Pride Center. Welcome.
Hey, Keith. So nice to be back with you.
Uh,
Although under terrible circumstances.
Well, I know it's been much too long, and as I keep saying to old friends recently, it's really nice to see you, but these are the demonstrations we were doing in the 80s.
Yes.
And for this in particular,
Yes.
I wanted to reach out to you because this is such a deja vu moment of, I remember what we were dealing with in the 80s and the lack of support and what happened and the incredible change that we could bring about. And now we're about to go back to those same days. So let's start with, what are the direct programs at the Pride Center? No, first, tell us how much funding is being lost, and then we'll talk about the direct programs that's impacting.
Yeah, and I'll just talk about our health and wellness programs, which is about a third of the work of the Pride Center of Vermont, because those are the programs that I direct that are most impacted with this grant loss. At the end of December, we were not given forward a $50,000 grant that was helping us do more than just HIV work, but sexual health and wellness for other STIs too, and for COVID and Mpox vaccinating. We were getting a supplemental on top of our HIV grant, which is just shy of $200,000 a year, is what it's been for the last several years. We knew with this grant cycle that we were going to have the same pot of money that was available in past years, that we were going to have to write a grant, an HIV grant, where we were not allowed to say gay, bi, or trans. It was already a really hard heart process for us. My teammate and I are two of the only currently active HIV testers in the state of Vermont. I don't know how many exactly of us there are, because during COVID, a lot of folks have been trained, but they haven't been activated in the field. You don't just get trained and come out here. It is a really there's technical ways to run that test, but you're also navigating somebody to care through an incredibly stigmatized virus. And we also were not carried forward on our You First Health Department grant. We found out in late March. We knew that we might not be invited back in, but we lost that $40,000. So
okay, what did that grant do?
So that grant was for our chest, breast, and cervical screening support, doing social outreach and wellness connection with women, femmes, and thems who are looking for access to care for cancer screenings. And so as of the end of June, we will not be doing that work. We got, I think the award was $55,000 for our HIV grant. So it's about 20% of what we've gotten historically. So you'll see us do about 20% of the work that we've done. That will impact our in-person HIV testing. That will impact our ability to give out HIV self-test kits. That will impact our ability to even be out in the community, talking to and navigating people to care. There's not a bar event that I go to that I'm not talking about PrEP prevention for HIV or bringing condoms or naloxone. So this is like our sex, drugs, and harm reduction work is going to be directly impacted. Our Thrive Queer and Trans People of Color program has been under our HIV grant. That program is going to get impacted. Specifically, my teammate Richard and I's jobs are at high risk. I'm somebody who's HIV positive, so to be impacted by a loss of funding as a trans, queer, HIV positive person targeted by our government, who literally is saying, we cannot get this grant because we're not serving the priority populations. Yes, we are. You're saying we're not getting this because we serve queer and trans people, and they want us to keep dying, Keith. And it's a really like hard thing to see our government do again.
Well, it's high priority people, high priority in whose determination, in whose vision. And I think you're absolutely correct. This is not even a benign, this is a direct, you don't count, and we're going to do what it is we can that we know you're not going to survive.
Yeah,
mean,
and
there-
I mean, as the Pride Center of Vermont, as a partner in the HIV network, it also includes our case management organizations and our syringe service programs. So there's folks serving folks with HIV, our medical centers. This is a whole care package under Ryan White money. And our specific piece under prevention, the Pride Center of Vermont is the only queer and trans org in the state doing in-person HIV testing. We have other Pride centers that are doing distribution of both information and HIV self-test kits, but nobody's doing what we're doing. And nobody in the HIV network is serving explicitly queer and trans people the way that we do. So this is very targeted, and the state is trickling down the harm, and they have equity as one of their values at the health department. And I'm like, shame on you. This is the opposite of equity.
I was going to say, one of my concerns about self-testing is, making it accessible and easier for people to do it. That's incredibly wonderful. But
Yeah.
sort of an analogy is it took 3 tries for my mother to be able to do her ancestry DNA testing correctly so that it was a valid sample. You can't just hand it to somebody and say, read the instructions, come back when it's done, or here it is, mail it in. There's
Yeah.
so much more that needs to go. I want to back up a little bit, because is PrEP one of the treatment modalities for which federal funding is already starting to be pulled? Because I know that they said coming in that, they were going to shut down the HIV/AIDS research, treatment, development centers.
Yes.
I see you shaking your head.
Yep, they came for research first. They came for international HIV support first. They have come for us through our HIV grants and have specifically come for queer and trans direct serving orgs. This is happening nationally. We are just one of the many. We need to channel more money into opioids, or HIV support for opioids, so that they're keeping us infighting. It's unacceptable. We were really hopeful for a collaborative set of work. They wrote things into this grant that we've never had before. They wrote HIV PrEP and DoxyPEP into this grant. They wrote sex workers into this grant. Integrated testing events for more than just HIV, but STI support. We've been doing those things and want to continue doing them. Now we can't, or in a very limited, hyper limited way. So it's confusing and frustrating. And we stay hopeful, like we have needed to pivot. We've seen reproductive medication access be the first medication access that folks are worried about stockpiling. Hormones are coming for trans folks, but PrEP is next on the list to reproductive care. I was told recently by somebody else, like, hey, we need to tell people to stockpile PrEP meds. This is going to be specifically for queer and trans folks an access issue. part of what I did during the pandemic was made an HIV and an HIV prep pamphlet with information that brings you back to local resources. We give those out with the self-test kits. And Keith, to your point, it might take multiple times to run the kit correctly. Or what do I do when I get my reactive status? I need a confirmatory blood draw. This test is not telling me I have HIV. It's saying I need to go confirm my antibody result. And so having someone coach and navigate through me, who do I go to, especially if this was from sex or drug risk exposure? Because the stigma for HIV, I'm embarrassed at how far we've not come.
Well, and again, that sense of deja vu, because while you're saying all of this, I remember the early days of founding Vermont Cares and going out, and we did parties in people's homes so that it was your group of friends, because if there were changes that you needed to make, these were the people who were going to support you in that. And it was an opportunity to ask the real questions.
Yes.
Not just a pamphlet, but it's like, okay, this is what I do. Am I at risk? And then you could work with that individual and say, okay, this is when transmission could occur. Let's pull apart what you're doing. Is there a possibility? And it took repeated times for people to grasp those concepts.
Yeah.
I'm looking at now where there has been the availability of prophylactic meds so that I don't have to worry about that. We have a generation coming up for whom this isn't a concern. It hasn't been a thought. And all of a sudden, we're going to impose upon them saying, this is what you need to do. And I remember the resentment we felt at that point. I mean, and you and I have talked off and on. We've talked about how do we make this a body sex positive experience. All of a sudden, we're going back to a denial. So, okay, so realistically, and I know this is hard to tell, what's going to be left of your program?
TBD at this point, Keith. We are doing critical asks for funding everywhere. There's an acute crisis phase over the next 2 weeks to month and a half. By the end of June, the bulk of our health and wellness funding will be gone, and we won't hear about another small grant until early June. That is a substance use grant. So we're making all the planning, scheming options that we can. I personally am considering options like going down to part-time. Things like furlough are options for folks.
Okay, but furlough doesn't support you. Furlough doesn't give you an income.
No.
Okay.
No, you could be on unemployment. Unemployment's a really small. We're nonprofit workers. We're already working for pennies, and we're underpaid. And I come from deep poverty, as do many people in my community, and we are people who are lived experience. So it is impacting us also intimately. And the thing that you were saying about prep, the work hasn't really changed a whole lot with the way that we put information into peer networks so that we have those conversations with each other. And something that's changed with prep is that the conversations aren't happening. The conversation is, I'm on prep, we don't need to talk about it. Well, you being on prep doesn't tell me when you were last tested for chlamydia, which is one of our most common STIs in Vermont. And you should have an oral swab if you're giving a lot of oral sex, which is not something that providers are coaching folks through. So we are not getting good sexual health and wellness from our doctors, rarely.
Yeah, well, I know. I think my provider is one of the rare exceptions. Is the health center in Plainfield.
Yeah.
And I remember when there was all of the concerns, and all of a sudden it was like, okay, gay men, we kind of need to know what you might have been doing with anal, because there are things we may need to test you for now. And I walked into my provider just after all that information was coming out, and she looked at me and said, I I need to have a conversation with you that we really haven't had before. You need to tell me exactly what you do and how you do it. I mean,
Yeah,
and I actually looked at her and said, thank you.
thank you.
One of the and I keep praising them when they do those things. One of the things that concerns me, and you sort of referenced it, this isn't just here. This is a
Every,
national phenomenon.
yep,
It's impacting all of us.
all of us.
But this is where it's impacting us right here. And I remember those early days and the fights with the CDC and about fundings, whatever. We were a small rural nonprofit. We were going up against the big boys in the big cities. We couldn't compete for the granting money, even
No,
though in theory there was monies out there
we will
by
not get that nationally.
until there was a very specific rural outreach effort.
Yeah,
We were pretty much out of the equation, which in the 80s and early 90s really put us at a disadvantage because we had people who had grown up in Vermont, went away to the big city,
yeah.
became HIV positive, and came home to die, which was the reality at that point in time. And we were fighting to have the resources to help them. And fortunately, hospice stepped up and said, we got it, we're here. But, and again, as we're talking, I've never forgotten those days. I,
No,
I, s- I still remember who's not here now.
yeah.
And I hear this happening and it's who am I going to lose? And there's no reason for it.
No, the negligence, the outward attacks and discrimination on us because of who we are. Again, that stigma hasn't changed at all. And we need to grieve. We need to transform. What you're saying about the national money is still accurate. Like
Yeah.
we're seen as doing good and we're seen as a refuge state. So folks are moving here to receive those good services, but our services are not great. Even though they could be, we have great providers. And when I look at Vermont, I'm like, we're holding ourselves back by saying, we're doing good. We're doing good. Okay, is not great. And what we could be doing if we worked intersectionally and collaboratively, as I've been talking about this too, and like the financial giving local is a way to relocalize and support local. I know there's Vermonters probably giving to big national campaigns like HRC, Trevor Project, like really important, great national work. What about considering giving local? Because this hyper localization of attack, we're not going to match up for national emergency HIV funding in the same way that other states are. So even if we get some, we're not probably going to get a lot. And so we're really going to need to rely on our local community to help get us through that moment. Maybe somebody has money to give, but maybe also someone can call their legislators and say, hey, I hear there's a discretionary fund. I hear the Pride Center is asking for $200,000 because shame on you, you did not grant them for HIV work. Give them some of that money. You've set aside X millions. That's a way to support, right? Or like boosting that we are at a critical funding point. Talking about the work and being visible about the work. So much of what we do is in the shadows because people are so ashamed of who they are and what they do and how they live their life. So much of our work, right? Just today, I had somebody reach out, a worker from another group. Somebody moved here with 10 days of HIV medication. There may be
No.
there may be 6 days in, Keith, and not connected to a provider. And I'm like, I don't care what your identity is. I'm going to help navigate you to care. Like, this is what I do. And I'm so glad that someone knew to tell you to call me because I'm going to help you.
Okay. And as we're running out of time, one of the things that I want to put out there is what the federal regime is doing is not only a deliberate assault to let us die,
Yes.
but they're creating a scenario where there is so much anger,
Yes.
and we are competing for limited resources.
Yes.
And at the time when we're standing there yelling at them and yelling at each other is the time where we need to figure out how we come together as a community
Yes.
and take that anger, help to define us as a community again
Yes.
and stand together.
And
So-
channel that anger fire, because if we don't, it seeps out in really toxic ways. And for me, anger is not for an individual, unless it's like a harmful person of power, but institutional anger and how we call people in. And I have the silence equals death on the wall here. Action equals life, the other part of the line that we have so forgotten. And to stay in our joy, ACT UP did hard work and through great parties. Our pleasure, our visibility, our expression and authenticity, they are coming at us because they are afraid of us. If we let them keep us afraid and disconnected, they are winning. I refuse to let that happen while I am still on this mortal planet. We need each other. We are doing great intersectional work, and this is why they are coming so hard at us. So ever hopeful am I, Keith, that we are going to keep remembering who we have been and who we are, our mutual aid, our diversity, our collective power, and tending our own individual stress, because wow.
Yeah, and I absolutely agree with, the ACT UP model of for every demonstration, for every die-in, there was a party, there was a dance. And I remember the Emma Goldman quote that we all wore on our buttons that said, "If I can't dance, I don't want to be part of your revolution."
Exactly. So I love to DJ. Yes.
We need to embrace each other and hold tight. And
And
with that,
come with a positive message, because when we say we're no, we're anti, what are we for? What do we want? What are our dreams and visions?
exactly. We can't be what they're about, which is just how do I destroy? It's how do I create?
Yes.
So thank you.
Thank you,
And I
Keith.
will see you at Montpelier Pride.
Yes, May 30th from 4 to 7 p.m. at the State House lawn.
All righty. Thank you.
Thanks, Keith.
Hi, everybody. I'm here with Sandra Gail Lambert, a very prolific writer. Sandra is the author of My Withered Legs and Other Essays, in which a 70-year history of disability is threaded throughout writings that celebrate lesbian love, explore the slapstick moments of life, and share the obstacles and triumphs of becoming a writer later in life. She has also written the Krauss Essay Prize and Lambda Literary Award nominated memoir, A Certain Loneliness, as well as the novels The Sacrifice Zone and The River's Memory. Her work has been widely anthologized and published by the New York Times, the Sun Magazine, Orion, and the Paris Review. She is an NEA Creative Writing Fellow. Lambert lives with her wife in Gainesville, Florida, a home base for trips to her beloved rivers and marshes. Welcome, Sandra.
Well, thank you so much for having me.
It's great to talk to you. I really enjoyed the collection. And I should tell you, I learned of it when I was watching the Publishing Triangle Awards on YouTube, and I saw that you were nominated for the Judy Grahn Lesbian Nonfiction Prize, which is very prestigious. So I heard it mentioned and went out and bought it, and I really loved it. So thank you for writing it.
Well, thank you. It was such a thrill to be nominated for anything that said Judy Grahn something another on it.
It's so impressive. I love the Publishing Triangle Awards, and all the nominees should be proud. Did you go to this?
No, I was watching on TV, same as you, on the computer, the same as you.
YouTube, yeah, I know. I have never gone. I'd always wanted to maybe go to one, but I've never, I would be only as a spectator, not
Mhm.
So let me ask you a couple of questions about the book.
Sure.
And of course, we'll show the cover as we talk. How did you happen to put together this collection of essays?
Oh, well, I mean, I had the memoir that originally were a bunch of essays that some just made it as essays into the memoir pretty directly, but others I pulled apart and stretched and re-changed so they could become more of a memoir than just separate, unique essays. So I had that experience. And then as part of putting out a book, the publicist people want you to do what they call companion essays. So they're not from the thing that's being published, but they're adjacent to it. And then they can pitch those. And so I had like 3 or 4 essays. One got actually printed in the New York Times and the other in the Paris Review. So I had a good start for another group of essays. Just from doing that. And then I wrote more, and then I got other essays, and then that got interrupted by COVID. Once COVID started, I was just filled with rage, about just how disabled people were being triaged into death, basically. And I don't write well in the moment. Sometimes my essays take 10, 15 years to come to fruition after the actual event. So I tried writing them, but they were just ranty things that who would want to read that? There were people that were writing the same type of thing as I was that were better of responding in the immediate to an event. So I decided, for a while I didn't write at all. And then I thought, I'm going to start writing science fiction. I loved science fiction when I was growing up. It was the only place I saw disability in it. They didn't call it disability. They called it, having to wear a harness because you're in high gravity or something, but it was the only place I found myself as a little girl. So I thought, let me go back to that. And it felt like the only way I could write about the current times was to put it in the context of the fantastical. So I found a fellow writer who worked as a bartender and so was out of work, and I paid her to teach. She wrote great, fantastical stories, and I just paid her to teach me a class. And so I started doing that. But then we got the COVID vaccines, and I went to the Swanee writers conference, and I got in, and I felt, all my like fancy credentials were all in nonfiction. So I applied that way, even though I felt like a fraud at this point because I wasn't writing that. But I went to it, and the faculty person there, Isha Sabatini Sloan, was so supportive of my writing and said, you have to keep going. These essays, no, but these essays, yes. And, so I came back from that and just put it all together, and started sending it out. And pretty quickly, I got it for writing. I mean, quick for writing. I got University of Georgia accepted it. I mean, I sent it about 18 places, which isn't really much for me. And pretty quickly, they accepted it and sort of fast-tracked it. I mean, you have to publishing moves at a glacial pace. So when I say fast track, I mean, it only took 2 years to get published, but, so that's how that one came together. But then I had to write more companion essays. And so I have a little bit of a buffer of essays ready to go for another one. So what am I doing? I'm writing a nice, big, fat science fiction novel.
Really?
I mean, why, if you're, I'm 72 now, I want to try this new thing for me. And I take great joy in it, and I get to put the current politics in that context. So I like it.
Yeah, you said that local politics is the only place where you could feel you can have an impact.
Yeah.
Um,
And that's even becoming less so,
I find it a little frustrating. I'm a little involved in local politics. It's difficult times. Let me ask you, I guess, how long did it take you to write and assemble the essays? It sounds like it was over a very long period.
Some of them, yes, some of the, I mean, the ones about my mother I wrote before she died, and she died 15 years ago, so. And some of them are older than that. Others are, I pulled the collection together and thought, ooh, I need something here. I don't have any, my memoir has tons of stuff about the natural world of Florida, and this one, all of a sudden, it wasn't there. And that's just not who I am, so I wrote more essays more about that to add in.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing I do is I have a Substack newsletter, and I write these small essays that go into that. And once they're in there, I can't publish them anywhere, but I can redo them and pull them out and put them in a book. I mean, I can't. A journal is not going to want to take them. They only want stuff that hasn't been published, but I can use them for an essay collection.
So that's your next project? Or that is
I'm not quite sure where I'm going with the next, I have essays going and I have my novel going, so we'll see.
maybe if you wouldn't mind, giving us a taste of the essay
Sure.
collection, and read for us.
Well, I'm gonna read for about 5 minutes, which means I've taken one of the essays out of my withered legs called Crip Humor, and then I've excerpted that down into what I hope makes a 5-minute sense of something.
Great, thank you.
Anyway, it's called Crip Humor. The patrol car barrels through the stop sign and pulls to a halt. I let my wheelchair slow and the little dog matches my pace and then sits beside me when we come up alongside. An officer rolls down his window. Our heads are at the same level and close to each other. I laugh, not a snicker, but a belly guffaw, mouth wide open, that possibly sends Spittle into his vehicle. I laugh because he's just said, I could give you a ticket. And I think he's joking. 1,152 people, I did the math, an average of 3 times a month in the 32 years since I started using a wheelchair, have yelled at me that I'm going to get a ticket. I've been told, and I've sometimes said to myself, that there's no harm meant, that although tedious, these responses could be taken as a sort of encouragement or admiration. Let me pause the story here to argue with my own self. There is harm meant. First of all, men, is it required that I say not all men, not only men, are yelling at a woman they don't know? And what are they mad about? Perhaps they believe disabled people should never be fast, agile, graceful, competent, or seem as if they're having loads of fun. These men are tiresome, but I don't care because I am fast, agile, graceful, competent, and having a really good time, especially when I have the little dog striding along beside me, ears back and tail bouncing. But this police officer in his patrol car must be friends with someone who uses a wheelchair and knows how funny he's being. He's to be lauded for taking the joke that I think we are enjoying to get in common to new heights, what with him actually being able to give tickets. After all these years, he's the first to elevate the cliche to a meta level, and I'm showing my appreciation with a long and loud laugh. But the young officer turns face forward. His jaw bulges, and I am close enough to see the pounding beat of a blood vessel in his neck. Here's a man in uniform who is angered by my disrespect. He turns his face back to mine and proclaims that he saw me run that stop sign with his own eyes. He says I'm in trouble. He keeps saying angry things, and now the spittle is coming my way. I stop laughing, but I'm still smiling because my body believes in the protective cloak of disabled old lady whiteness. And here's another pause in the story. I know people with disabilities make up a too large percentage of the too much harm done by police. I also know many of them are disabled Black people and people with mental disabilities. I am neither of those. Still, I do move in a different way than what's considered regular. I've thought about how to respond if I'm pulled over in my car. My driver's license is in the side pocket of my wheelchair, which is behind my seat, which means I'd have to turn my seat around to get to it, which means I have to move my hand out of sight, dropping it down between the seats to toggle the control switches, and the seat's movements, swing sideways up and down and back, are sudden, fast, and can jerk. I practice how I would explain all these steps to an officer, and then how I would ask them for permission to perform each one. But I don't tell anyone this. My preparations seem a sensible thing to do, but they are done dispassionately. It's as if I'm play acting the real danger of other people. The visceral truth for me in this moment and in other moments with the police is that I have no fear lodged in my body that this interaction could go sideways in a violent way. I grew up in a military household surrounded by drill sergeant types with puffed out chests who barked orders in lieu of conversing. Except for the occasional spanking when I misjudged, I knew just how far to push against an overinflated sense of authority, and the controlled and known pain of a spanking was experienced by me as mostly embarrassing and inculcated defiance rather than fear. Yet the statistics, the videos, the truth of people's lives say my body is wrong not to be wary. The tirade ends with him yelling that I could have died. I have been recently diagnosed with breast cancer. He doesn't know about the cancer, but his threatening prediction still pisses me off with a sudden harsh ferocity. I want to beat the side of his car and yell back that I am not going to die. So now we're both staring at each other with our eyes unblinking. The dog whines and pulls on the leash. She's right. It's time to de-escalate. Thank you.
Thank you. That's great. I guess we should explain to our viewers that you have old polio, is what they call it. So
Well, I am an old polio because we're all old now that in this country that got polio.
So you spent much of your childhood, your early childhood, sort of in the hospital, right?
I did. I was in and out quite a bit, but it's sort of before my memory. But I mean, there's all sorts of memory.
And then you progressed from crutches to a wheelchair.
Mhm.
You have great essays about all those struggles that I really encourage the audience to read.
Well, I just did what was most effective and efficient at the time to being able to do what I wanted.
Do you have a writing community?
Yeah, well, yes. I mean, lesbian feminists of the late 70s, early 80s.
I do know.
We that's where I learned the importance of and how to do community. So when I started writing more in the 90s, I'd go to a conference and I learned things, but a writing conference, I mean, but mainly I wanted to gather other writers or be gathered, and they didn't have to be right like I did or be what I looked for, or what I was attracted to was this when they had this generous personality, both because, I liked it, but also because I wanted to learn how to emulate it.
You worked at a bookstore for a while, or you
I
owned it?
did, Karis Bookstore for most of the 80s.
I love that bookstore, and they're
Thank
going
you.
strong. And
Yes, they are.
I'm sure you know that Alexis Pauline Gumbs's mother worked there,
Yes,
introduced her to all that lesbian feminist
yes.
literature. That's and they're still doing, I'm sure you know, Zoom,
Yeah.
broadcasts. Well, good. That was really, I only went there a few times when I lived in New Orleans, but it was a hub and sounds like it still is. And I wanted to ask you about that, although it's not part of the formal script. So who is your audience, Sandra?
Oh, well, it's mostly women. I mean, that's not only that, but it just is, and it's huge percentage of lesbians, although of course not only is that true. Old people, I mean, old women, they're my people, and they, we relate to each other. It's become more and more true. But also all sorts of people, all sorts of people. I never know, like you called me from Vermont, like how do I know how that happened? I mean, I do know now, but like what happened there, I'm thinking.
Uh-huh, uh-huh. Well, I think I'm maybe a couple of years older than you. I just had a birthday Wednesday. And
Happy birthday.
thank you. I related to so many passages that, and including the mother stuff, which I'd like to talk about if we have time. But first, let me ask you, who are your literary influences? You mentioned that you read Nancy Meyers, but her audience was mostly able-bodied readers.
Yeah, I learned early on, and I wrote like this early on, but where you can tell by the way they use pronouns that their audience are able-bodied people.
Mhm.
And I would read that and I would feel excluded, and I think, why? You didn't need to do that.
Mhm.
You just trashed me, So I changed how I wrote immediately. But I I ran them, I had the bookstore. So, we're talking Dorothy Allison and Toni Morrison and Joanna Russ. Oh my God. But when I moved to Florida, or one of the reasons I ended up in Florida, there were a multitude, but it wasn't like I fell in love with the natural world here. It was as if I had always known it. I had never known it. And yet I felt completely at home and this yearning to be more and more a part of it. So writers that wrote about the natural world were ones that, not necessarily of Florida, were ones that informed my, like, um, what's her name? Terry Tempest Williams, The Clan of One-Breasted Women.
Mhm.
How she takes her body and then her family history and then the environmental history of her region and then global politics. I thought, I want in one essay, that became the first chapter, I think, of her book, Refuge. But I thought, that's how I want to, I can't write that, but that's how I want to write. I want to write in that way. There was Janice Ray who wrote Ecology of a Cracker Childhood about growing up in a junkyard in the well, it's in Georgia, but it's similar terrain to what we have here in Florida. And I thought, I want to write with, I mean, part of her thing made me cry, like I want to make people cry, like, so I started thinking about, people that I wanted. Jack Rudlow, who is an environmental activist in the Panhandle. He wrote this whole book about one little wooden dock in the backside of some property somewhere, where, the smallest thing, barnacle, becomes the universal everything, it was, and I thought, these are examples of ways that I want to write, and not necessarily about the natural world, but also just about everything.
Where did you move to Florida from, and how long have you lived there?
I was working at the bookstore in Atlanta, and I moved here in '89, Gainesville, Florida.
Mm-hmm. You have a wonderful essay called Alligator Protocols. We could chat about in a minute. So I guess let's go next to the two essays about your mother. I
Okay.
really love them and I really related to them. And so would you mind talking a little about them? You
My mother and I were not beloved of each other, that, but she moved down here into a retirement community, maybe, I don't know, 15 minutes from my house. And I took care of her more and more as those last years happened. And I started writing about it. But all the writings were all, oh my God, they were all, she's wrong and I'm right, or some very, a lot of, just resentment and puffed up. This is not pleasant to read, this stuff. You need a little bit more perspective.
Yeah.
So these two essays eventually, I had a couple of things that had a little bit more perspective in them. And I had originally thought I was going to do a whole thing about my mother, but I thought, it was this hard to get perspective just on those two essays. So I needed, I needed a higher word count for to turn the book. So I put them in there, and as often happens, I think they work well in there with the other essays. So
Yeah.
was there something specific you wanted to know about
Well,
them?
I mean, there was one scene where you're at a party, I think, and all these
Oh,
women
yeah.
are romanticizing their relationships with their mother and how wonderful it is.
Yeah.
You found that frustrating. I hate this romanticizing of parental relationships. But also the scene in the Cinco de Mayo party in your essay, The Last Party, that's so important, and it was really riveting.
Thank you. Thank you. It was just a few days before my mother died, and since it was the place had a Cinco de Mayo party with all the most stereotyped hats and all that you can imagine. But so it's just happened, like her day, and then she died today, actually, May 16th. She
Oh
died.
my gosh.
So the party and then her death came really close to each other. So I liked writing about her chair dancing and drinking beer so close to the end of
Yeah.
her life there.
And the transition where she spends the first night, she spends the first night without you being there, and how you called every few hours, and then, I mean, that's also powerful, I thought.
Yeah. Thank you.
Well, let's take a minute and talk about alligator protocols. I love.
Okay.
Um, so tell us about it. It was I've seen an alligator or two in my day, but not as many as you have. But
No, well, it's part of Florida. And I wanted to add one of the memoir has more like kayak trips and more, immersion in the natural world. And this one didn't. So I thought I can write about this event that, and Becky and I have a long history of kayaking together, very long. And then as we
Becky is
in the story, not my girlfriend, but a good friend. And
okay.
And then we brought our relative, then we put our our now wives into kayaking with, as well. So so the four of us had been on this trip before, and I thought that's the last time I'll ever do that trip because I'm getting older and it has to, the water levels have to, things have to be right. And yet we did it one more time. Who knows if it's just one more, but I think it's probably this last time. And it was a great trip, it was just great.
And you went ahead and saw all the alligators.
Yes, and all the birds, and we had, there's certain skill level to dealing with coming around a corner and seeing some behemoth. You know, and so we just used all of our observational and our skills and just had a really good time doing the twisty turny part of that trail.
How did you happen to include that in the collection?
I wanted something with immersion in the natural world of Florida because it's such a huge part of my life. It just seemed wrong not to have something like that in there.
Mm-hmm. Um, well, is there anything else you wanted to, time is marching on? Are there any valedictory comments you'd like to make?
Um, I want to talk about, um, I went to we have the Lynx bookstore here now, this wonderful bookstore for the past year, independent, alternative, wildly political bookstore that just got started. And they had they have events every 2 seconds. And they had a woman who's a shark scientist and has and she, like, as a young woman, relative to us, and she looked around her PhD program, and there were no other African American anyone's, and she wasn't getting a lot of support. So she dropped out and she developed her own amazing institute for the study of shark science. That's very active, and she gets to do all the types of research that she wants to do, and she gets funding, and she brings young people and exposes them. It's down here in Florida. And I listened to her and I thought, and she calls herself a rogue shark scientist. And I thought, I want to be a rogue writer. Like, I had always wanted to be a marine biologist, when I was a little kid. But no, it just didn't happen. And I thought, but I could be a rogue writer. And so that made me think, I'm 70 something now. I should just be doing what brings me joy. I should not be resting on my laurels, only doing this stuff because I know how to do it. I can write an essay. It will probably get published somewhere, maybe, if I work hard enough. I know how to do that. But I want to learn how to do stuff I don't know how to do. I want to try writing a novel when I have no clear idea exactly how you do that, a long plot-filled novel. I want to learn this stuff, and I want to give that a try, because why not? Let's just do it. And so between age and COVID, I just encourage everyone, whatever field they're in, to become the rogue part of that field.
That's very inspiring. Have Alexis Pauline Gumbs has that book Undrowned.
Oh, I know. It's so amazing.
Have you read it? I haven't read it. I bought
Well, I don't know if this is secret or not. I was not the big judge, but one of the reader judges for the for the NEA. I got an NEA, and then they get us, they pay us to read all of these things. And I'm flipping through reading all these things, and I have to judge them, give them numbers, and the higher ones get passed on to the big judges. But we get to do one where it doesn't matter what anyone else thinks, it gets passed on to the big judges. Normally you have to have a couple people think the same thing. And I came across one of her essays from Undrowned, and that was my one I picked for, immediately I thought, everyone did that probably, but it was so exciting. I thought, this is just amazing. Click. This is one goes directly to the big judges. So
wonderful.
and then I thought, they're anonymous, so I don't know who this woman is. But I started, after I judged everything and it was all turned in and ethically everything was done, I started Googling the subject matter and found her book Undrowned and read it.
Yeah, it's more reason that I should read it, even though I bought it several years ago. And it's kind of inspiring because our grandson is, studying climate science and being out in nature. And, he's a young 22-year-old and very excited. So, there's a lot of exciting stuff going on, even though the climate is kind of in peril.
Yeah.
But Sandra, thank
Yes.
you so much for joining us. It's been great fun.
Oh, it's been lovely to be invited. Thank you.
Thank you for joining us. And until next time, remember, resist.